This video is to show you a couple tricks and techniques to do your page layout and a couple new tools that we haven't used before. So I'm going to start with fonts. Some of you may have done this before, but this might be new as well. So we're going to be using selected fonts, and that's going to change every semester. So we'll tell you which ones are good to go. But when you need to download them, there's a couple websites that we tend to use. fontsquirrel.com and urbanfonts.com are two of them. And for this design, I've used Sketch-A-Lot as my title font, my headline font, and Technico as my copy font, which is all the smaller writing and captions. If you were at a magazine and looking at an article, the article would be the copy. In a newspaper, it's all that text. So not your titles, not your pull-out quotes, that kind of stuff. And so on the websites, there's always a link that lets you download the file. Font files are going to have an extension of TTF or OTF. Either one works for what we're doing. And this one, the download button is right here. And when you download, it'll go down here into your download bar if you're using Chrome and you have that set up, or it'll go to your Finder into the downloads. And so typically you'll see these zip files. There's one, there's the other. And when you double click it, it goes to a folder. And then when you double click that folder, it opens. So I already have these kind of all open because I just did it. And in there you'll see it'll have a few different files. So in the Sketch-A-Lot there is this license file, and then this is my font file. So when you double click that file, you'll get a little install font button. And I've already done it, but we can do it again. It just tells me I already have it. If this ever comes up and it says minor problem, you can just click the little box and hit install checked. If it says major problem, you don't want to do it. It's probably not going to work. And sometimes you'll download a font and it won't be a folder. It'll just be the file. But whatever you kind of get from them, you're looking for those TTF or OTF files. In this one, you'll see there's a bunch of different versions. There's a bold italic, regular italic. Sometimes you have to do each one individually. Sometimes you do one and it brings them all. That keeps changing as updates change with our computers. So if you wanted the bold and you don't see it in your Illustrator, you might have to go back to your folder. And so once you double click and hit that install, let's do the bold one for the heck of it. So I get this little window here. I hit install font, and now it's in my font book. So I'm going to close all these to clean up all my windows. And so now when I go here into Illustrator, they'll just be there. So right now I have my Sketch-A-Lot because I already installed it, but you'll see if I go around and I look, I'll have that, what was it called? Technico, right? So it's there. We don't want to do that. We want to keep this. So that's how you download fonts. And what happens a lot of times especially with fonts that we pull off the internet, is that they're going to need what's called kerning. And we're going to talk more about typography soon. But it's important to know how to do this because your text might need it. So let me do a new one because I already kerned those. I should have unkerned them. Let's put a new word down. So I'm going to put it in our Sketch-A-Lot. And I'm going to put Wonder Bat. Let's see how much kerning Wonder Bat needs. I'm just going to make it real big so we can see it. And so kerning is the space between letters. And so if you look at the space between the W and the O and the O and the N, and you start to really kind of eyeball what that looks like, you might notice where some feel squishier than other. So here between the O and the N, I'm going to double click to get my cursor there. I'm going to hold the Option key down while I push the letters apart a little bit using my left and right arrows. So if I use my right arrow, it's going to move everything over away from each other. If I use my left arrow, it's going to pull it together. So the goal here is to make it consistent. So sometimes I go in and I just kind of play and do all of them. Sometimes I really just look and see what needs it, because every letter combination kind of works differently with spacing. And so you always have to check that. For example, let's go over here for a second. So down here on my strengths, that's pretty squishy together. Maybe it looks cool and I'm okay with it because it's pretty consistently squishy. It looks like somebody kind of wrote it with a marker. I'm digging it, but maybe this is too squishy. So I'm going to go in here with my cursor. Like this ST is kind of crazy looking. So I'm going to I'm going to open that up a little bit. So I'm using my Option key and left and right arrow. And maybe I just want to open it all up a little bit. Maybe I don't like the squishiness. So I'm going to go in here, and this is called kerning, K-E-R-N. And so that's something to really pay attention to. Now look at that. Oh, that's horrible. I need to kern that in. That looked really weird and gross. Okay, so every font is different. Every letter combination is different. It's kind of fun. It's very meditative. So we want you to check your text. See that R and that C? See that weird gap? I'm going to bring it in a little bit, just a smidge. It's real easy to overdo it. It's really easy to like bring everything too close or put everything way too far away, and then it starts to look super strange. So definitely kind of your goal is a nice even consistency. And I'll do weaknesses too now since I did strengths. So I'm gonna unsquish it. I'm gonna open up that kerning, increase the kerning. I just want it to be consistent. I want it to kind of look like it works. And you'll notice now that I start showing you this, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. Sorry, not sorry. Okay. So that's kerning. Oops. And that's going to give your layout a much more professional look. You'll see that from here on out, we're going to ask you to always check your kerning. Another really important thing that you always have to get in the habit of doing, because it's so sad when you have a beautiful design and then a big old spelling error on that. So there is a spell check on Illustrator. I believe if you go to Edit, maybe check spelling. But I always use the command, which is Command I. So to run your spell check, you'll get this little window. Hit Start, and it'll go through. Now, we want it to be MIA. We put that there on purpose. So we want it to say that. So I'm going to hit Ignore on things that I know maybe are just strange words or names or something like that where it's not in their dictionary. But if it's something that does need to be fixed, you can hit Change, you can check the suggestions, or you can go back and fix it yourself. But please run spell check. That's always super important. As well as the readability of your text. So kerning has to do with that readability. It does affect it. Other things that affect it are size. So right now, this copy, the origin story on this page, is 10-point font. And 10 point is okay. 9 and 8 are pretty small, but they're still readable. But you cannot go under 8. That is just too small. So if you're trying to fit something in, you need to come up with some different solutions. But you don't also want to go to 8 and 9 if you don't have to, because that's pretty small. That's like a caption next to a photo or something like that. It's acceptable if you have a really long story, but you definitely don't want to go under 8 ever. But this one's 10. It's pretty good. You know how when you turn in an essay, the teacher always wants 12 point, right? It's a nice, easy to read range of size. Another thing that we'll get into more with when we study typography more, but it's really important here, is called leading. And leading is right here on your character panel. If your character panel is not there, you can Command T and it'll come up as its own little window. And leading is the same thing as what we call line spacing. So it's how far apart the lines are from each other. And the more far apart they are, it kind of gets easier to read, but then it takes up more space. So you have to find what doesn't look too squishy, because if it gets too squishy, it gets hard to read, right? Like that's starting to get a little jumbled and hard to read when you look at it. But sometimes you need to play with that to kind of get a good space, because you don't want it to take over your design. Speaking of space, one of the things that we're really going to be looking at when we grade this is the spacing of the page design. So where do you have everything? Do you have it strangely right next to something? Is it nice and evened out? Is this like randomly in a weird spot? Or is it kind of, have you really thought about the interaction of the positive and negative space, the empty space and the space with stuff in it? So one of the things that you want to be aware of is like how close things are to each other. So if this is like right here, that feels cramped. It doesn't feel intentional, it just feels kind of careless. And so thinking about the space you have around everything, as well as not putting something right on the edge. Because what's going to happen is if we printed that, that would get cut off. Just like your name, you don't want to have your name like right at the bottom of the page. You always want to have a little bit of a margin. And one way to do that is you can put your rulers on by Command R and pull out a guide and kind of drop it at like 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch, and give yourself these little guidelines as a reminder of what you need to kind of keep clear. So right now everything's pretty good. This is a little close, maybe I'll bring it in a little bit. That's a little close, maybe I'll bring it down a little bit. This, it doesn't matter because that can go off. The idea is that can go off of the page to kind of extend the design. So really looking at your spacing of everything and making it nice and even. One of the great tools in Illustrator is the alignment tools, and they're usually up here. So this is our little hotkey to alignment, but you can also bring up a window for alignment. Sometimes it's over here, sometimes you have to bring it out. And what that lets you do is it lets you align to the artboard, so the page, or it'll let you align to other things. For example, I'm going to kind of throw it off just in case it was close so you can see it. So right now I've got this to the right, but I want to center it. I want it to be dead center on the page. So there's a few things I should probably do. The first thing is I should center my text. So over here in my paragraph panel where I have my left and my center alignments for the text, I'm going to center it in that box, and it just did something funky way over there. But that's fine, because what we're going to do now is align it to the page. And so there's always this little button that says Align To. Right now it says Selection, and I'll show you that in a second, but we're going to change it to Align to Artboard. And then if I click the center, the horizontal align center, it's going to put it exactly in the middle of the page. If I wanted it to be exactly in the middle down here, I could do the vertical align center, and that's in the center of the center of the center. Perfectly centered, right? Super helpful. Same thing here. So this text I have centered because I like how it looks visually better. Maybe you dig that more and you like that better, kind of right aligned, going to the edge of the page. Whatever you want to do with it, but that's where those are in paragraph. And I like mine centered, and I like that centered, but I want this and this text, these two text boxes, to center together. So I'm going to hold Shift while I click on one and then the other, so I have these two selected. And now I'm going to change in my Align panel, Align to Selection, and then I'm going to horizontally align center. And what that did is it aligned this to this. And now I can move these over and kind of get them where I want them, but that is centered up with each other. And that just makes it more visually pleasing. It all kind of just works better. And there's a lot more you can do here with distribute, and this is super helpful to use. Same over here. Right now I have these all really nice and centered, so it feels really balanced. But I'm going to just mess with it for a second. That looks different. It doesn't feel it feels more haphazard. It feels not intentional. We want our designs to feel intentional. So to do that, I'm going to make sure first everything, all the text itself is centered, because that can affect it. Sometimes it doesn't really affect it based on your text boxes, but sometimes it does. I'm going to make sure that's centered. I'm going to make sure this says Align to Selection, and I'm going to center it there. So now we have this all centered together. What I don't like is this consistent with this? And there's a couple ways you can do it, but what I like to do is view it with a grid. So I'm going to Command apostrophe to put a grid on. It's also up here where you can show grid. Right now it says hide grid because I have it on. And I can zoom in and kind of look and see where these are sitting. So if I put it down on a line and I want to give it like one line in between, that just helps me kind of make it consistent. And this is what designers do. They really go in and kind of try to make everything super consistent so that it flows, it feels right, it makes sense, it feels balanced. I'm going to turn off my grid, same thing, Command apostrophe. And then what's nice is when you get things really like perfectly where you want them, you can grab stuff and group it. Uh-oh, where's my group? is it not in the right click anymore? Okay, Command G. And so now these are grouped so I won't accidentally mess up all that work I just did. So those are some tips to making some really nice clean layouts. And if you have any questions about any of that, just ask me and really look, your goal is to make it as balanced as you can. Have fun.